This is the most common disease worldwide, at least according to the American Dental Association. However, what you may be unfamiliar with is how it relates to your diet and lifestyle. What I'm referring to is dental caries. Now, no, dental caries do not magically appear, and it's not something that you should really neglect. In fact, it poses a major public health concern affecting quality of life, although it is largely preventable. In today's episode, we're going to review nutrition and oral health. Now, because oral health is such a broad term, we'll be touching specifically on tooth decay or tooth damage, which may lead to the development of dental caries and cavities. I'm Hadi, dietitian, and it's important to note that the information provided in this episode is strictly for educational purposes and is never intended to replace a medical diagnosis nor change the course of treatment for any individual patient. First, let's start with why, as in, why would you even need to care about optimizing your oral health, or at least try to improve it? Well, as relating to nutrition, oral health can alter food choices and negatively impact food intake, leading to suboptimal nutritional status, which may increase the risk of chronic systemic diseases. According to the American Dental Association, and I quote, "A bidirectional relationship exists between oral health and diet, as one clearly affects the other." Now, it's important to note that oral health includes much more than nutrition alone. Things such as brushing, flossing, genetic susceptibility, and many other factors which, frankly, are beyond the scope of this episode and my personal expertise, however, that collectively dictate the state of your oral health. Now, I need to say, this section is heavily simplified. I won't go deep into the mechanisms here, however, just note that the following section has been discussed with professional dentists. Great, so on each tooth inside your mouth exists a protective hard cover called the enamel. Now, the enamel is mostly made of calcium and phosphorus, which are two minerals which bind together to form this protective enamel. Now, when damage to this enamel is excessive over time, dental caries may develop. Scientifically speaking, this process is called enamel demineralization, which, as the name implies, the minerals are being lost from the tooth structure, exposing the now sensitive tooth to oral bacteria, to food, and to acid. According to the NIH, more specifically the National Institute of Dental and Craniofacial Research, at early stages this process might be reversible until damage is excessive and a cavity or a hole in the tooth structure is formed, which is irreversible. So let's try relating that to nutrition. Sugar is a main driver here, and when I say sugar, I mean specifically the white table sugar that you all know. Scientifically speaking, its name is sucrose. So, sucrose is ranked as the most cariogenic or the most damaging type of carbohydrate. Now, the reason is that as sugar in your mouth gets fermented by oral bacteria, which is normally present there, organic acids get produced, which attach to the enamel. The pH drops, and the population of oral bacteria also shifts to a population that is more cariogenic or more damaging and more acid producing, specifically as excessive sugar consumption happens. Eventually, the process of demineralization occurs. In fact, and according to the WHO, or the World Health Organization, there is a clear dose-response relationship between the amount of sugar consumed and the risk of dental caries, meaning as we consume more and more free sugars in our diet, the risk of dental caries increases, and this shows a strong relationship between the two variables. Now, to continue on, the question that most of you are asking, are all sugar sources equal? Meaning, does a sugar coming from a, let's say, sugar-sweetened beverage act the same as a sugar coming from, let's say, a whole fruit? And the short answer, frankly, is no. See, first, we need to define our terms. So, I want you to think of the term free sugars as this big title. So, in this big title is including the added sugars, which are normally added by manufacturers or by consumers, as well as sugars naturally present in other foods such as honey, such as fruit juices and syrups. Now, free sugars have the potential to be cariogenic or damaging. Now, sugars that are naturally present in fruits, in vegetables, and in milk do not exert cariogenic properties and may even be potentially anti-cariogenic, so they may be protective against dental caries. This may be related to the presence of other protective compounds in these foods. For example, the calcium content, the polyphenol compounds, fiber, and water. And the hardness of some fruits and vegetables stimulates saliva production. Now, I want to build a bit on why saliva production is protective against dental caries. Amongst many other mechanisms, and according to the American Dental Association, first, increased salivary flow provides calcium and phosphate ions, which are known to remineralize the enamel. Another mechanism is through providing fluoride, known to be protective against dental caries, and which strengthens the enamel. A last mechanism could be the buffering effect of saliva, buffering the acidity of some foods. Now, surprisingly, this is also why, according to the American Dental Association, chewing sugar-free gums may actually decrease your risk of dental caries, of course, when added to a normal oral care routine. Now, to discuss milk and dairy products, cow's milk specifically is classified as non-cariogenic or non-damaging, and dairy products in general tend to be good for your oral health. Now, why is that? It's because they provide calcium and phosphorus, which tend to buffer the acidity. Practically speaking, for example, crackers that are eaten with cheese are actually less cariogenic and less damaging than crackers eaten alone. Now, this is a very interesting observation that shows how combination and not also composition of the foods affects the state of our oral health. We also cannot neglect the consistency of sugar or how adhesive and chewy a food is on dental caries, which reflects longer exposure time for this oral bacteria to ferment it. Starchy foods can also be regarded as somewhat of a concern because the longer starches are being retained in the mouth and stick in the teeth, the more salivary amylase, the enzyme that breaks down these starches to simple sugars, is active, which provides more substrate for the oral bacteria to ferment the sugar. Now, I know what you're thinking. How much sugar can we safely consume per day as prevention? Well, please note that sources of free sugars are mainly processed foods, and I do personally think that's where most people get their added sugars from, even more so than regular white table sugar addition. Now, according to the WHO, limiting your free sugar intake to less than 10% of total caloric intake, and ideally to less than 5%, minimizes the risk of dental caries. Now, personally, I do think that less than 10% of total caloric intake is a good starting place for most people, since, and according to the CDC, 3 out of 5 Americans are already exceeding this recommendation. Now, practically speaking, and if you want to take a 2,000 calorie diet as a standard, for example, this would be equal to 4 tablespoons of free sugars per day, which is worth 200 calories of free sugars per day. Now, the good news is that less than 10% and even 5% of total caloric intake does not necessitate a sugar-free diet, and actually it allows for consumption of a limited amount of sugar-containing foods as part of a balanced diet. As a small tip, you can replace your sugar-sweetened beverages with their diet equivalents, for example, that are sweetened with artificial sweeteners and sugar alcohols that are poorly fermented by oral microorganisms. Now, for example, xylitol or xylitol, that is a sugar alcohol, is actually not only non-cariogenic, but arguably may exert anti-cariogenic properties. However, the ADA does not have a policy on the use of xylitol for caries prevention. So far, we have covered the amount of sugar consumed, but what about the frequency, as in how often we eat sugar per day? Well, it appears that not only the amount of sugar consumed is irrelevant, but also the frequency of dental caries, or how often are we eating it. As it's hard to separate the two factors, and the recommendation of limiting to maximum 4 times per day of eating sugar seems to limit the amount of sugar consumed. To touch a bit on the micronutrients, things such as calcium, magnesium, and phosphorus are essential for teeth formation and proper mineralization. Also, vitamin D is a very important micronutrient, as inadequate vitamin D status may lead to an inadequate calcium status called hypocalcemia, which may increase the risk of osteoporosis and teeth demineralization and tooth decay. Now, frankly, this is why following the dietary guideline recommendations of a balanced diet from all food groups will ensure that you get the proper and adequate amount of micronutrients that you need for healthy bodily processes. So, as it relates now to hydration, we cannot neglect it, as proper hydration is crucial for good oral health. In fact, and according to the FDI or the World Dental Federation, and I quote, adequate water intake can help neutralize acids, wash away food particles, and promote saliva production. In addition to that, we cannot also neglect the importance of adding fluoride to water. Now, this is according to the ADA, is the most efficient way to prevent cavities. However, it is important to note, and as relating it to nutrition, fluoride is present in trace amounts in most foods, especially if not prepared with fluoridated water. So, most of the times, what you can do to incorporate fluoride in your daily life would be the use of the fluoridated water supply, toothpaste, which is fluoridated, mouth rinse, and other products. However, I'm not going to recommend anything here. You can talk to your dentist about any supplements or fluoridated products that you can use. As a last concept of today's episode, I want to talk about dental erosion, which is when acids, this time of non-bacterial origin, but more related to diet acids, dissolve the dental hard tissue progressively and irreversibly. Now, to relate this a bit more to nutrition, the source of this acid is mainly the diet. Some examples of food sources include soft drinks, sports drink, acidic snacks, and natural acidic fruit juice. However, and according to the American Dental Association, the pH of food alone is not to be used as a sole factor determining how erosive a food or beverage is. To give an example here, yogurt, which has a pH of about 4, considered acidic, is not considered erosive due to the content of calcium in it, which acts as a buffer to neutralize the acids. So in conclusion, it is important to note that we need to take into consideration all the factors related to the food before jumping into conclusions. To end this episode, I would like to thank all of you for watching. You can find the sources used to make this episode in the description down below. And I hope that I have provided enough information for the people that are interested about the topic of nutrition and oral health.